may be seated. The first of Euclid's 5 general axioms is that things that are equal to the same thing are equal to each other. Our speaker today, whom we could argue has no equal, understands this very well and revels in the discipline, clarity, and beauty of mathematics and mathematical logic. Over the years, he has led countless Brooks students to think precisely and deliberately, to develop systems for solving difficult problems, or Sudoku, and to apply these lessons and strategies broadly to grow up and live life well. We've learned much about Miles Dusty Richard in the nearly 36 years since he arrived at Brooks. Holder of the Richard F. Holmes Endowed Chair, Dusty is a mathematics teacher, soccer coach, advisor, mentor, auto mechanic, classic sports car aficionado, and according to Nate Jeremiah, a better dancer than Mr. Packard. Dusty began his career at Brooks on August 1st, 1978. That was exactly 13,049 days ago, which is in fact a prime number. How lucky we have been that Dusty has chosen to spend his career at Brooks. I am honored to introduce our featured speaker today, Mr. Dusty Richard.
I am honored to be able to talk to you for a few minutes at such an auspicious occasion to mark the induction of some of our very best scholars into the Cum Laude Society and to further celebrate those of you already members. I'm honored because nowhere in my past was the Cum Laude Society very much of a possibility. Those we honor today have demonstrated not only intelligence, but a willingness and capacity to apply that intelligence in a consistent and effective manner. These students have worked hard and have lifted themselves to the very top of our academic pyramid. The teenage me, not so much. I had the occasion a few years ago to have to close down my mother's house as she moved into a healthcare facility. Over 50 years of accumulated stuff I poured through, trying to determine what to keep and what to toss. One afternoon, I came across a file labeled School. Therein, I found a full collection of my and my siblings' school reports. I had the opportunity to relive my high school years at Brown and Nichols in all their, shall we say, truth. It was really interesting to see what my teachers had to say about my work in the same format that I had written about so many of my students. Most of my teachers noted my intelligence, and none said that I was ever unprepared for class. But almost universally, they felt that rather than grasping for the full weight of ideas, I tended to be content with the superficial, light version. Expediency pervaded my work. My history teacher differed a bit, saying my passion for current events made me a sound debater. My calculus teacher said I was occasionally brilliant, but mostly rather unimpressive. I doubt that I would have lasted very long in my own BC calculus course. These reports, reading them so many years later, were sobering. Clearly, I lacked the intellectual maturity and capacity for work that I find in so many of my present students and that we here honor today. I can't imagine anything that would have crushed my parents more than a sense from my teachers that I was unwilling to commit myself to the, quote, full weight of ideas. It was simply not the way they raised me. Both of my parents were true intellectuals. They believed mightily in facing the world with rationality, and that having and exchanging ideas was the duty of all citizens, particularly those that might lead. And so you were expected to come to the table with knowledge and ideas. When I say come to the table, I mean literally come to the table. Dinner, from my earliest years, was considered time for important discussion about what was going on in the world. You had better be ready to engage. You had better know what was going on, have read the newspaper, listened to the news. If you tried to argue off the top of your head, you were found out rather quickly and probably were doing the dishes. You needed facts, and being smart wasn't enough. This was rational discourse, family style, though it didn't lack passion in any way. So sometimes, particularly later in my teenage years, it was irrational discourse. We talked about everything. Early on, it was the civil rights movement, race, religion, politics. My parents were dyed-in-the-wool liberals, quite a bit outside the mainstream in the 50s. They had lived through a depression and a world war. Their experiences were vastly different than mine. As I looked back on those wonderful dinnertime conversations, I realized that this was their way of developing our intellectualism, of honing our skills of debate, of teaching us to be engaged learners. We were taught that it was very much as important to listen to the ideas of others as it was to offer our own. It was just as significant a mark of intelligence to change one's mind because of new facts and arguments as it was to be able to change others' minds. The intellectual process was a two-way street, and often not linear. As the 60s wore on, I found myself beginning to disagree with my father a bit on some things. The first major source of contention was the war in Vietnam. I just couldn't understand what we were doing there. It wasn't because I was scared to death I might have to go. I was. But I had begun to worry about what we as a nation were doing in the lives of people I simply didn't much care about. It sounds crass and non-empathetic now, but that's how I was as a teenager. That's how we all were. Our people were beginning to die in growing numbers, as we were reminded every night on TV. And an awful lot of those people doing the dying were people of color, and they weren't exactly getting a fair shake here at home. So how was this fair? I may have been non-empathetic, but I knew well what was right and what was decidedly not. I believe my mother agreed with me. She was probably being practical, surmising that with my present state of academic malaise, I might well fail out of college and end up in a rice paddy in Southeast Asia. But my father was adamant. No matter how many facts I brought to the table, no matter how passionate or logical my argument, he simply wouldn't move. To him, this was a matter of supporting our president, our president. His argument was simple. We had elected him, this was where he was going, and we needed to follow him. My dad was a teen guy, and I realized right away that his generation really believed this stuff. Actually, without this concept, we probably never could have won World War II. He had waited 8 hours in a line on Monday after Pearl Harbor to volunteer to go to war. My generation couldn't conceive of that type of civic responsibility. So here we were at a real intellectual impasse. Our experiences were so different that we couldn't possibly convince each other of our point of view. I went off to college, and for the first time I got to vote for a president. My dad voted for, I'm embarrassed to say, Dick Nixon. I for the rather affable Hubert Humphrey. It was an election held in an extraordinary period of time. Our nation was reeling from race riots, active war protests across the nation's campuses, and a massive increase in urban crime. Nixon represented the old guard in law and order. I doubt that there has ever been a more poignant generational gap in our history. The older generation was definitely feeling that it was all getting away from them. Yet still my dad and I argued in the most respectful tones. Could our discourse remain rational despite how differently our experiences shaped how we saw the world? My father made sure that it did. I was forced to follow his lead, even though I wanted to scream from the rooftops how wrong he was. And then Watergate happened a couple of years later. The war was winding down. I was already teaching. We talked one night after breaking fast on Yom Kippur. He said, you know, you were right all along on this Nixon-Vietnam thing. It's ruined us. It's going to take a long time to recover. It was like an NFL referee saying, upon further review, he was still teaching me what it meant to be a real intellectual. Now that I was more mature, I was learning a whole lot more. Now that I was teaching, I had begun to appreciate how much application meant in the process. I hope that all of you reach for the full weight of ideas. Study hard and think deeply. Come to the table ready to opine and equally ready to listen. Never think you are weak because you are swayed by someone else's conviction. Know what's going on in the world by actively engaging it and those around you. Put away the superficial comfort of social media for a while. Forgo the enticing stimulus of the latest video game just a bit, and reach for the true satisfaction of engaging in the great exercise of intellectualism. You are all intelligent. Now do something great with what you were naturally endowed with, as these cum laude members have so impressively begun to do. Thank you.